Peter Harlow was a respected husband, Ethan Harlow was his quiet, withdrawn son, and Marie Harlow was the devoted wife who held their family together. But behind their polished suburban life was a secret so disturbing it would lead to betrayal, brutal murder, and a twisted love affair that shattered everything they once were. The Harlow family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. Their two-story home sat neatly on a manicured lawn, complete with trimmed hedges and flower beds. Marie tended to every weekend. To the neighbors, they were the kind of family everyone admired. Peter Harlow was a respected financial advisor who drove a sleek black sedan and wore crisp suits even on casual Fridays. Marie was seen as the elegant but friendly wife, always offering smiles at community events. And then there was Ethan, their 22-year-old son, who kept mostly to himself but was always polite when spoken to. If anyone ever imagined the picture of a stable, well-functioning family, it was them. But what no one ever saw was the growing rot beneath the polished surface, a sickness eating its way into their private life, one secret at a time. Behind closed doors, Peter was a man growing distant, his conversations with Marie turning cold, mechanical, and rehearsed. The warmth that once held their marriage together had faded into uncomfortable silences at the dinner table. Ethan, quiet by nature, spent much of his time in his room, his laptop always on, earphones in, avoiding eye contact when spoken to. What was mistaken by others as normal introversion was in fact something much darker. Ethan wasn't just retreating into his own world. He was hiding a secret that threatened to destroy everything around him. It wasn't just rebellion or typical youthful angst. There was guilt, shame, and confusion swirling beneath his calm exterior, things even he didn't fully understand. Peter's late-night absences started to become more frequent. He claimed he was working late or meeting clients after hours, but Marie, intuitive and sharp, knew something was off. The subtle signs were all there. The way his phone never left his pocket, the way he flinched when she reached for it, the hollow excuses that didn't match the man she'd married. At first, she thought it might be another woman. That would have been easier to process. But as small clues began surfacing, they didn't fit that narrative. The secrecy felt different. It wasn't just about protecting a relationship. It was about hiding something forbidden, something that, if exposed, would rip their family apart in ways that were difficult to comprehend. It was Ethan's behavior that finally gave Marie the strongest suspicion that something more was happening. She noticed him glancing nervously at his father, avoiding conversations with her altogether, his anxiety almost palpable. There were whispers between Peter and Ethan when they thought she wasn't around, glances that held too much emotion to be innocent. Marie's instincts screamed at her that something was terribly wrong, but the full picture hadn't yet come into view. The quiet dread building in that house wasn't just about infidelity. It was about betrayal of the deepest kind, a betrayal that crossed not just emotional boundaries, but moral ones as well. The perfect family was nothing more than a mask, and underneath it was a secret that would soon explode with devastating consequences. Marie had lived with Peter for over 25 years, and in that time, she had learned to trust her instincts. When something felt wrong, it usually was. The emotional distance, the secretive behavior, the sudden protectiveness over his phone, it all pointed to something bigger than just a midlife crisis. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the discovery she was about to make. It started with something small, as many life-shattering moments often do. One night, after Peter had gone to bed, Marie sat alone in the living room with a glass of wine, her heart pounding as she stared at his laptop left charging on the desk. Curiosity gave way to fear, but she opened the lid anyway, driven by something stronger than hesitation. The password was the same as always. Peter never thought he needed to hide things from his wife, until now. It took only a few clicks to find the hidden folder, buried deep inside another folder labeled with something boring and inconspicuous, Tax Documents 2023. But inside, instead of spreadsheets or receipts, were photos, videos, and screenshots of messages. At first, Marie didn't recognize the other person in the photos, mostly faceless images taken in dark rooms or blurred selfies exchanged late at night. But then, one photo shattered her world completely. Ethan's face, unmistakable, staring back at her from the screen. The messages left no room for doubt. They were explicit, emotional, intimate. Not the kind of messages shared between a father and son, but between two lovers tangled in something too complex to name. Marie sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Her mind tried to reject what her eyes clearly showed her. A part of her wanted to believe it was fake, some horrible mistake or manipulation, but the proof was overwhelming. The conversations went back months, maybe even longer. Emotional confessions mixed with explicit descriptions of things no parent should ever read about their own child. The betrayal was total, not just of her marriage, but of her role as a mother. Everything she thought she knew about her family was now nothing but a cruel lie. Shock turned to anger, and anger into a quiet, burning hatred that spread like wildfire in her chest. She didn't scream. She didn't confront Peter or Ethan immediately. Instead, Marie shut the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and washed her glass in complete silence. From that moment, everything she did was calculated. Every smile she gave to Peter, every question she asked Ethan, was an act of performance. Inside, she was unraveling, trying to hold together a life that was already crumbling. Her nights were now spent replaying the discovery in her mind. The images and words burned into her memory like scars. She began noticing things she hadn't before. Ethan's flushed expression when Peter entered the room, Peter's overcompensating friendliness, the occasional slip of a gaze that lingered too long. Everything fit now, like jagged puzzle pieces snapping into place, forming a picture she wished she could unsee. Marie was no longer just a betrayed wife. She was a woman pushed to the edge of reason, standing on the precipice of something dark and irreversible. The days that followed were filled with a strange, suffocating silence. The Harlow home, once filled with routine chatter and casual family interactions, now felt like a stage where every movement was rehearsed and every glance carried hidden meaning. Marie played her part perfectly, wearing the mask of the loyal wife and caring mother, but inside she was rotting. The betrayal she carried felt heavier with each passing moment. She no longer saw Peter as her husband. He was a stranger sleeping in the bed next to her. And Ethan, her own son, had become something unrecognizable, a living reminder of the unspeakable secret festering inside their walls. The tension in the air was so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. Peter kept up appearances, leaving for work in the morning, returning late at night, offering routine excuses for his absence. But his behavior had changed. He was more watchful now, more guarded, like a man who knew the truth was on the verge of surfacing. Ethan, on the other hand, grew increasingly restless. His once quiet demeanor had shifted into nervous energy. He avoided being alone with Marie, dodging conversations, barely able to meet her eyes. It was as if guilt poured from his every movement, and yet he said nothing. Marie became obsessed with collecting more evidence. She searched through drawers, email accounts, old messages, anything that might help her understand how long this betrayal had been happening. She even started following Peter on his late-night drives, parking several houses down, watching him disappear into unfamiliar buildings. It wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about humiliation, rage, and the unbearable weight of knowing that her family had been turned into something grotesque, something no one could ever understand if she tried to explain it. But there was also something deeper stirring within her, something darker than betrayal, a thirst for revenge that grew stronger with every passing hour. While Marie unraveled mentally, Ethan deteriorated emotionally. The burden of what he was hiding from his mother was breaking him from the inside out. He began skipping meals, locking himself in his room for hours, emerging only to grab water or pace around the living room like a ghost. The paranoia consumed him. Every noise, every sudden movement from Marie made him jump. He knew she knew. It wasn't a question anymore. It was only a matter of when everything would explode. The love he had felt had twisted into something bitter, a mix of fear, shame, and desperation. The walls of that perfect suburban home were closing in, suffocating everyone inside it. Yet from the outside, nothing looked unusual. Neighbors waved hello, packages were delivered. Life moved forward as if nothing was wrong. But inside that house, 3 people were on a slow descent into madness, each carrying a different version of guilt, betrayal, and hate. Marie's mind was no longer thinking about confrontation. She was thinking about destruction, about wiping away the shame with something final, something irreversible. And soon that thought would no longer be just a thought. It was a warm summer night when everything finally came undone. The weight of the secret, the endless tension, and the unbearable humiliation reached a boiling point, and the perfect mask Marie had worn for weeks finally cracked. She had spent that entire day moving through the house like a ghost, drifting from room to room, barely noticing the hum of daily life around her. Her mind wasn't in the present anymore. It was lost somewhere between rage and despair, trapped in a silent war against the two people who had destroyed everything she believed in. The kitchen was spotless, the living room neatly arranged, but the calm appearance was nothing more than a fragile shell hiding the chaos building inside. Peter came home late again, as expected, acting as if nothing was wrong. His tie loosened, his face flushed with the kind of self-importance that made Marie's skin crawl. Ethan was upstairs, pacing, locked in his room, chewing at his fingernails, drowning in the anxiety of what he knew was coming. That evening, the tension in the house wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating, pressing down on every surface like invisible hands tightening around the throat of the entire family. For weeks, words had been held back, truths left unspoken, but now it was all about to be unleashed. The confrontation started like a spark, small but deadly. A passing glance, a slight shift in tone, and suddenly the air was electrified with hatred. Marie's voice, calm but trembling, finally let the words spill out that she had been holding for too long. The betrayal was spoken into the room like poison, filling every corner, infecting everything it touched. Peter tried to maintain his composure, offering empty denials and excuses, but the evidence had long since killed any hope of escape. Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed and pale, frozen in horror as the last pieces of their false reality collapsed around them. But it didn't stop with words. The emotional eruption gave way to something darker, something raw and physical. The screaming blurred into chaos. Marie snapped, and in that moment, the lines between mother, wife, and victim disappeared. She was simply rage incarnate, moving without thought, driven by nothing but betrayal and the hunger to erase the shame she'd been forced to carry. The kitchen knife was within reach. It felt cold, solid, real, something she could control when everything else had been taken from her. The violence was sudden, brutal, and unstoppable. Peter's shocked expression barely had time to form before the blade met his chest. The neat, controlled man who had once played the role of husband was reduced to a gasping heap on the polished floor. Ethan tried to stop her, shouting through sobs, but Marie, blinded by everything she had suffered, turned on him next. Blood painted the walls of their perfect suburban home, soaking into the floors that once held family dinners and birthday celebrations. By the time sirens echoed through the neighborhood, the Harlow family was no more. Marie stood over the broken bodies of her husband and son, breathing heavily, covered in blood, the quiet suburban world around her untouched and unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded inside. The aftermath of the murders sent shockwaves through the entire community. The Harlow family, once held up as the model of suburban success, was now at the center of a story too grotesque for most people to fully process. Neighbors who had smiled and waved just days before stood on sidewalks in disbelief, staring at the yellow crime scene tape that now surrounded the once pristine home. News vans lined the streets, reporters scrambling to piece together the story, but what they uncovered was far worse than anyone could have imagined. The headline alone was enough to make people recoil in disgust. A secret affair between a father and his own son, exposed by a brutal double stabbing committed by the betrayed wife and mother. It didn't sound real. It sounded like the twisted plot of a movie, but this was no fiction. It was all horrifyingly true. Marie was arrested at the scene, her hands trembling but her expression disturbingly calm. The blood on her clothes had dried by the time she sat in the back of the police cruiser, staring out the window as flashing lights painted the neighborhood red and blue. Peter was pronounced dead at the scene. Ethan, barely alive when paramedics arrived, was rushed to the hospital. Against all odds, he survived, but the physical and emotional scars he carried would never fully heal. His life had been shattered before it had even begun. Torn apart by choices that would follow him forever. The betrayal, the shame, the violence, all of it fused together into a single nightmare from which he would never fully wake. The trial became one of the most talked about cases in the region's history. Courtrooms filled with curious spectators, media personalities dissected every sordid detail, and psychologists weighed in on national television, debating what kind of psychological damage could lead to such a horrifying situation. The affair between Peter and Ethan dominated the narrative, with many refusing to believe it could even be true. But the evidence was undeniable. The photos, the explicit messages, the recorded late-night meetings, everything was presented in painful detail, stripping away any last remnants of privacy the family once had. Marie's defense painted her as a woman pushed beyond reason, a victim of the ultimate betrayal. Some sympathized with her, saying that no human being should have to endure such humiliation, especially by the two people she trusted most in the world.